Hi, my name is Mark Devine, retired Navy SEAL commander, founder of SEALFit, and New York Times bestselling author of The Way of the SEAL. These days, everyone I speak to is increasingly concerned by the growing danger and uncertainty in the world. The onslaught of terrorism, technology, climate change, and political fighting, among other crises, can seem overwhelming. And when we get overwhelmed, we burn out. We get fearful, and our thinking gets distorted. It's a real challenge to maintain a positive attitude and the daily practices leading to peak performance these days. If you feel stuck in a rut and like you're losing ground, trust me, you're not alone. I've made it my life's work to learn how to harness the power of my mind for peak performance. My invention was a unique way of training my own mind, body, and spirit, inspired by ancient warrior traditions and aided by my daily training for over 30 years. What has resulted from this intense personal quest is an extraordinarily effective system of personal mastery. This system has allowed me to tap into nearly unlimited potential and to optimize my performance and productivity exponentially. I had a vision to share this knowledge with the Navy SEALs to help them develop the elite warriors of the future. It's been taught to thousands of SEALs and other special operators who are using the methods in hot spots around the world right now. And since 2011, I've taught it to tens of thousands of entrepreneurs and executives. These leaders have developed extraordinary mental strength and focus and are succeeding at an uncommon level. Unbeatable Mind Training will deliver you the tools for total transformation and ensure that you get the traction that has been lacking in other developmental programs. Since I know you want to enhance your performance in both your personal and professional life, I've got a free virtual training coming up where I'm going to teach you how to use this Unbeatable Mind system to harness the power of your whole mind. During this training, I'll teach you the tools that you can start using right away for immediate results. Sign up on the link below. Total transformation, serious traction, and a committed tribe to hold you accountable to uncommon standards of excellence. Let's do this. Hoo-yah! Welcome back to the Unbeatable Mind podcast. This is Mark Devine. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've got my good friend Jamie Wheal here from the Flow Genome Project. We are going to have a very interesting conversation. Before I introduce Jamie in a little more detail, I'd like to let you know that we've completely revamped our world-class Unbeatable Mind online training. This is where it all started in 2012. And I've gone back and completely redone all of the training videos, all of the practices, and rewritten the entire content. And that program is launching in January. So check out the information on this page for the special offer from my team. It is awesome, guys. You're not going to want to miss it. And it can come packaged with our new 3-day Unbeatable Mind Academy experience, which will be run in March and September of 2019. That will become our marquee event from here on out. You're not going to want to miss it. Thank you so much for your support. Now, I've got a lot of notes here on Jamie, but I'm going to riff because I know Jamie. We've done a podcast in the past with your buddy Steve.
Yep.
You are the director of the Flow Genome Project, which we're going to have to explain what that is, or you're going to have to explain what that is. The author of an unbelievable book called Stealing Fire. Love it. Highly recommend it to everybody. And generally a all-around integrated, unbeatable mind type of guy who loves skiing, who's got an awesome family, who's fit, who, basically is the whole package. And I know you're going to tell me you've got some gaps and weaknesses, we all do, but, so I want to talk about you, like how you got your start and your inspirations, and also let's talk about flow. So thanks for being here. Super appreciate it.
Yeah, stoked to be here, Mark. Thanks.
Yeah. So I always like to start out just generally, like, where'd you come from? Like, who is Jamie?
Yeah.
Are you from this planet even? Or you could land
Not
here
the first time.
on an
Not
asteroid?
the first time that's been asked. Yeah. Yeah. Funnily enough, I mean, our worlds, as different as they are, there's a lot of overlap. So my mother was South African and grew up in sort of old school merchant ivory colonial South Africa.
Interesting.
But British South African. My father's family moved there after World War II, so that's where they met. And then he went back and he was accepted to Cambridge University, and he applied to the Royal Naval Flight School. And
no kidding.
And the Royal Naval Flight School was a 2% acceptance rate. And
was he with the RAF?
Royal Navy.
Royal Navy?
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
Wow.
And he became the chief test pilot on all the carrier trials for the Harrier.
Right on. Yeah.
And so that was my growing up, was somewhere between the Great Santini and Top Gun.
So you grew up in Britain?
Well, grew up in England and then was transferred here because, as you may remember from way back in the day, in the early to mid-'70s, a lot of U.S. Marines were killing themselves trying to learn to fly Harriers.
Right, I remember
so
that.
we got transferred to Virginia Beach.
So was the Harrier originally a British innovation?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Absolutely.
A contribution to modern military might.
Within the last century. Yeah, right. How about that?
How about that? That's killer.
Yeah, so that's what
I'll throw the SAS in that too, because they're pretty badass.
Yeah.
Okay, so your dad came over to help teach.
Yep, and
Marines how to fly
then he transferred to the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School at Pax River, and was made an honorary member of Annapolis class of '63. Whatever, would go up to all the football games. Like I was being groomed to actually go to Annapolis and do the U.S. Naval thing.
No kidding.
And I was in a bit of a pickle because I'm like, there's only two positions in the U.S. Navy I'd take. One would be a test pilot, and the other would be a SEAL. And this was obviously 80, so it was way before everything blew up in insane ways. And then I met my dear woman who said, "You're not going to go to the military. You're going to or be a lawyer. You should go and be a teacher."
I could see that happening. Fortunately, I didn't meet my wife until 5 years after I was a SEAL already. So but it pretty much ended my career. So
and I just took to my intention was to say, okay, now what can I do with mountaineering, with surf rescue, with wilderness medicine? Can I take on all the things that I would have in the formalized military situation and learn to manage life on the line situations just without someone pointing a gun?
Interesting. So what got you interested? Was it just your dad's lifestyle and his example that got you interested in, the special ops kind of mindset? I know pilots and spec ops have a similar mindset. It's slightly different, but there's a lot of similarities. And back into what you study now in accessing flow and controlling stress and living life like in a really, really rarefied mental state.
Yeah, I mean, I was a 3-season athlete in college, playing soccer and tennis and sailing. So certainly competitive sports was an
soccer,
aspect.
Tennis, and swimming. So I had the S part, not sailing. If I fell off the sailboat,
but
I would have been fine.
water sports, for sure. And so I always loved that, and then started training with the National Outdoor Leadership School and various Wilderness Medicine Institute. And those guys have a very, somewhere between McKinsey and Spec Ops, they train a lot of special operations communities and technical skills. So really kind of got a download of that sort of form of best practice, how to go out there and do things on the sharp end and keep yourself and other people safe.
I imagine you went to college.
Yeah.
Even though you didn't go to Annapolis. So where was that?
Yeah, went to St. Mary's College in Maryland, a tiny little liberal arts school on a beautiful sort of historic colonial campus, and that's where I was windsurfing. And then went to grad school in Boulder because I saw Jeremiah Johnson, that old Robert Redford movie that inspired him to buy
Sundance. Eaten by the bear, right?
He almost does, right? And I was like, where the hell are those mountains? Right. I'm going there next. And got into ski patrol and got into big mountains and that kind of stuff. So I just went to grad school where I knew I could still play outside.
Okay. So you mentioned Jimmy Chin, who's one of our friends and just an absolutely beautifully insane human being.
Yeah.
And I stood on the stage of the Beyond Line Summit a couple years ago interviewing him about skiing off Everest.
Yeah.
Do you do that kind of stuff?
Well, we didn't ski off.
It doesn't have to be Everest, but if you ski off anything that's pointy and sharp, I'm impressed.
Yeah. we actually took the youngest group of Americans ever up to Camp 3 on the north face of Everest, so on the Tibetan side, and then had them actually do a 2-day meditation solo in these medieval caves facing it. And we were the only humans on the Tibetan side, which is, I don't think you can do that again. I think we just got incredibly, incredibly lucky.
Right.
So we didn't have skis with us.
Before the Chinese clamped down.
Yeah. It was just a fluke series of events that let it happen, and I'm forever grateful.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah. But
was it a snow cave or a real cave?
They were actual caves that had been used since the Middle Ages by monks sitting there. And I remember my big epiphany. Did you have to use
like the Wim Hof breathing method to stay warm?
Well, we did do that. We actually, it was like Indiana Jones. There was this high altitude monastery up at like 17,000 feet that had been so high up the Chinese had never found it.
Really?
And it had hot springs, and it was crazy because...
Well, how'd you find it?
Well, because we
just hiking by. Look at that.
Well, we were with some amazing PhD studies and Peace Corps folks that had deep roots and connections. And actually the Tibetan guy that we were with was actually undercover resistance, Tibetan resistance / Yosemite climber, and sponsored by Marmot. So he had all the ins. But we'd get into these hot springs, and there were snakes coming out of the walls. It was like something out of fucking Indiana Jones. So at 17,000 feet, the only place the snakes could live in Tibet was in the thermals of the hot springs. And we thought we were tripping.
Holy
we were like,
cow.
what on earth is going on here? And it really was snakes
what kind
crawling
of
out
snakes?
of the Fortunately, non-venomous, but it was the freakiest. One girl
They
looked
were
down.
probably very peaceful.
Yeah, she looked down and there was a snake coiled around her ankle, and she screamed bloody murder. And I was like, I can't blame you.
I would have screamed bloody murder.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So,
okay, that's fascinating. So these hot caves, were they inside the monastery?
No,
there was
a raging crazy river, and the river actually punched straight through the rock. And their story was that Milarepa, one of their realized badasses, had actually redirected the river. And put it through this hole, because it doesn't follow like erosion. That's not how shit happens. The river just goes straight through a mountain and comes out the other side, and right beside it with these snake-filled hot springs. Yeah, so lots of fun adventures, and skiing off things. I'm not big on walking back down things that I had to climb.
Yeah, that's pain.
I'm a big fan of gravity, whether it's with wheels or slidey things.
I told Jimmy I'd do it if I could have a parachute. You know, so I'm okay parachuting off of things, but I'm not sure I'd trust myself to turn my skis downhill.
Yeah, well,
when it's like a 90-degree slope.
Yeah, and those are, it's that Samuel Johnson thing of like, there's nothing like the prospect of being hung in the morning to clear one's mind, So like, so having immediate consequences and having strong bodily sensations, G-forces, that kind of thing, and being in spectacular and dynamic environments, whether mountains or oceans, those are three of the biggest flow triggers around.
Right. And I was just going to say, so that's what probably got you in. So it was your own experiences of accessing stillness and flow that got you interested in the whole subject to begin with, probably.
Well, or more backwards from that. I mean, you probably know Mark Twight as well, right? Jim Jones, and he now trains, 300 and all the superheroes.
But did a great job training those guys, man.
He did, and most folks don't know that his real claim to fame was he was one of the most progressive and aggressive mixed ice, snow and ice climbers of the 80s and 90s.
Well, he was out in Jackson, and with Rob Wolf, those guys taught a lot of the climbers, or kept them in shape.
Yeah, and he used to write in Climbing Magazine. I remember this when I was an angry young man in college and grad school, and I remember he would always have this phrase. He would talk about how all mountaineers have it, and I would imagine probably some of the team guys do as well, which is the idea of feeding the rat. And that when you're down in town and you're fucking doing dishes and buying groceries, the rat just starts gnawing at you, and you have to go and do the thing. You have to go and feed the rat, and it's putting your life on the line.
Every SEAL has about 2 weeks before they got to get up and go. And
exactly.
Jump into some nasty.
So for me, it was just finding ways to feed the rat. There was nothing pretty or zen about it. I was an angry young man who was at war with the world, and the only place I found moments of quiet and calm were having thrashed myself to the brink of extinction, and then being grateful to come back home.
I love that about extreme sports, because it allows aggressive, like you said, angry, I would say agitated young men and women who really can't possibly sit in a yoga class or sit in meditation, for all their good intentions. It's a complete fail for them.
Yeah.
But you can find that same level of access to the surreal or the sublime through staring down the barrel of a gun, for a SEAL, or staring down the face of a cliff in extreme sports. Yeah. Fascinating. So what was, before we get into like flow and theory and all that, because that, we don't want to put anyone to sleep just yet. Yeah. Not that we're going to. But what were some of the most interesting experience you had besides Tibet? Like you got to write a book about that one, just period, or at least a chapter. Come on, or take me there. Yeah. If we'd probably have to break a few laws, Chinese laws, and maybe sit in jail for a while. But what were some of the most interesting things that you experienced in your career as an extreme athlete?
Well, obviously, compared to the likes of Jimmy and the rest of the folks that are really at the top of this community, I would say I was a sincere enthusiast. Sure. But that said, honestly, the most profound experiences of my life have been combining beautiful, wild, natural places with psychedelics and people I care about. and and hiking into natural hot springs, climbing some gorgeous peak, and being up on the Continental Divide, being in the middle of British Columbia in an old-growth forest.
You wouldn't necessarily combine the psychedelics with the extreme athletic part.
No, you fucking can. 100% you can.
Really?
In fact, that's basically psychedelics, big nature, sex, and action sports are really the hat trick of accelerated development. Now,
and
that
what if
said,
you did them all at the same time?
You can. It starts a little bit like juggling flaming chainsaws on a unicycle, but it's a shit pile of fun if you can pull it off and stick the landings. So yeah, I mean, my experience on that, and by the way, for those of you playing along at home, huge caution: don't do stupid shit. And when you get into,
just read the fine print. Don't do stupid shit.
Read the fine print, and if you are interested in combining, highly embodied action sports, back off your max thresholds. Right. So start this museum dose, IMAX dosages, which is not quite microdosing, but not quite heroic dosing, and then play within your zone of comfort. And if you do it right, you can actually, there's a whole underground community actually of wingsuiters, base jumpers, extreme skiers, all these things that have been.
Are you saying
combining.
A microdose of the sport or a microdose of the...
I was saying I would say don't bother with a microdose unless you're just interested in that. If you really want to get the full embodied sensation.
Until you've mastered the physical act.
But then pick a mesodose. Right. Pick an IMAX dose, and then engage your body and allow that heightened kinesthetic awareness that tends to come with a psychedelic experience and your connection to the natural environment that you're in to really get full fucking Taoist on it and experience the nature of the dance.
I have to ask you, have you ever experienced the same thing you've experienced in a psychedelic experience without psychedelics?
Yes.
Yeah, so have I.
Mm-hmm.
I've had
100%.
some incredibly trippy experiences that had nothing to do with drugs.
Yeah.
Because I haven't done drugs since forever.
Mm-hmm.
Although ayahuasca's nipping at my ear. The mother plant is calling to me.
Yeah.
It's probably the first time I said that publicly, but I'm... Mm-hmm. So when I was in the SEALs, I was in Guam and at the end of deployment and been meditating every day and doing our operations. And I was I'd had I wouldn't call beer psychedelic, but I had a few beers. Mm-hmm. And I was walking home and, it's just thick jungle, walking back to my little, my little cabin. And I was just in this like incredibly open, receptive, I was in a flow state for sure, like really peaceful. I had this like radical opening, as I was walking through the jungle, and I was only like, maybe a few hundred yards, but I remember running my hand along this tree. It was like a rubber tree. It's like petting it, saying hi to it. Who knows what was going through my mind at the time, except not much.
Yeah.
I was just purely open. And I felt, and I'm 100% certain that the tree grasped my hand. If I were to go back in time, I don't know if I would have seen the leaf wrap around my hand, but I felt it.
Yeah.
And I felt the tree say hello to me. Mm-hmm. That was a psychedelic experience. And I hadn't touched any drugs in 20 years.
Sure.
Pretty cool. So what would you say was going on there? You studied flow
a brief bit of sort of nature mysticism, right?
Nature mysticism, yeah.
And a nice encounter with a living system, which, at least for a moment, you dropped the boundaries of separate self and felt yourself to be a part of.
Right.
And
we
yeehaw
were the same
and amen.
Right, yeehaw and amen, right. We would say hoo-yah.
Yeah.
The SEALs. Yeah, pretty interesting. I know a lot of SEALs have those experiences. Now, since we're on it, I'll tell you another one. A friend of mine was at Mazar Sharif. I don't know if I said that right. Anyways, there was, I've told the story a few times, but never on air. There was a big gun battle there because this CIA guy named Nicky Spain, I think was his name, had been captured. He was also dead, but we didn't know it. And so they sent in some Green Berets, and the SEAL platoon, or a couple SEALs were embedded with the Green Berets. And they were going to go attack this prison that was basically overrun with Taliban, and they were holding this Nicky Spain guy. And so anyways, this massive firefight ensued. So there must be like 30 or 40 Taliban and like probably 7 or 8 Green Berets, and then this one SEAL, maybe 2. Anyways, my SEAL friend, they got pinned down, and my SEAL friend had an experience like I was having, like I told you about. Like he was just
in the midst of it,
in the midst of this firefight, Yeah. And I want to talk about later, how to induce these states, but he induced it. Of course, the intensity of the moment, the danger, the risk, being out in the mountains of Afghanistan is like a nature experience, a little bit high risk with people shooting at you, but still pretty cool. And he had a breathing practice and a meditative practice like I did when I was in SEALs. Yeah. And so he was able to induce this incredible flow state where time just literally slowed down, and he could see literally well before the enemy combatants would take a beat on him. He could see literally them. He could know that he was the target, and he could see them moving their weapon up. And all this is happening like real fast in real time. Yeah. But for him, it was like he had hours, almost, or minutes, just like a master or Neo at the end of the Matrix. Just here's the bullet. And he was able to literally just single-handedly fight his way in, taking out dozens of these Taliban. Yeah. Dozens. And then he got in and he found Nicky Span. And, the Green Berets were like, what in the hell is going on here? Yeah. He even describes a dove, fluttering up onto the battlefield and just next to him and then flying off. Yeah. Isn't that wild? I mean, of course, when he did this tour, and when he first told the story to the SEALs leadership, they're like, holy shit. What I mean? This guy's gone loony. Mm-hmm. But the more he told it and the more consistent it was, the more they said, oh, you got to go on tour. And so he went around and told everyone this story. And it was
the scoreboard,
really cool.
And the scoreboard validated it, right?
That's right. And this was many, many years ago, because that was at the early in the Afghanistan campaign. So it was probably like 2004 or 5. I'm just guessing, maybe 6. And his was a long line of stories that came out of Iraq and Afghanistan, which helped the military finally say, we got to start studying this again, because they used to study it.
Oh, for sure. They went deep in the 70s.
They went deep in the 70s with the Trojan Horse Project, with Stargate, with all these interesting things. Yeah. Remote viewing.
Yeah, and I think DARPA has actually been doing that on precognition, right? They did a survey of Afghanistan and Iraqi deployments, and when did somebody know there was an IED, do these things, and start trying to reverse engineer that skill set. Right. But your buddy's experience, sounds remarkably similar to Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido's original epiphany. I think it was in World War II, but he had breakdown bullet time, could see little flashes of white light before the bullets came, and he was basically just wandering through it all completely ahead of unfolding linear time. Right. And that was part of his turn to saying, hey, Warriors for Universal Peace is the next progression, and what we might best do with these skills and with these experiences.
Honor his contribution to Aikido. I've studied Aikido a bit, and I'm actually toying with the idea of going back, because it's such a profound martial art. I don't even call it a martial art, just an art, a world art.
Yeah, I set it down for a little while in my kind of younger years, because I was like, well, shit, man, this isn't going to work in the octagon,
Right. And to be fair, it wouldn't have worked for me as a SEAL.
Not work in the octagon or in a bar.
Kung Fu, that was good. Scars,
like quick, close combat, blocky, get the job done.
Right.
But as far as a form of neurokinesthetic programming,
that's unbelievable.
Right, just body movements that shift consciousness. I think it's unparalleled, particularly with the depth of the embodied philosophy that uncorks it.
So let's try to kind of break down flow from your perspective, right? It's one of the things that, I'll make a claim that we teach flow. We teach how to access flow. Yeah. So our big 4 skills, which are breath control, we're working with the breath, witnessing process, which is our form of clearing the mind, deeply concentrating, and then connecting with your higher sense of self. We call that the witness. That's the second. We don't call that skill that. We call it positivity, which is
interesting.
A catch term for basically controlling your mind and emotions and learning how to still them when you need to, so you can radically focus. So that's the second skill. The third is imagery. Using imagery in a future and past state, right? To create a gravitational pull toward a future and to release an energetic,
So are you actually deliberately reformatting past memories as well as in visualizing things to come?
New future memory that hasn't existed yet. So that's how we use visualization, which opens portals to the future and does all sorts of cool things. And then the last is a radical task orientation on the immediate thing, and only that thing that you need to do right now to lead you toward mission success. All of these take a long time to train, but I've been training them with the SEAL candidates, starting with the SEAL candidates back in 2007. And you may have heard part of our lore is like 90% of the guys that I've been training have been getting through SEAL training and making it look easy. And I say it's because instead of talking about these skills, we're training them. And when you train them and they begin to work together as a unified whole, then all of a sudden it creates this experience that we call whole mind or integration.
Nice.
And when you access whole mind or integration, then the experiences want to flow. Now, I've read Stealing Fire, and so I want to turn this back over to you. All of the other things you talk about, like the conditions, riding the edge, and skill and practice, nature, psychedelics, sex, all these things that create peak states are triggers. But what we train is someone to be able to access it independently, consciously, and to stay in it.
Yes.
And anytime they fall out, they recognize it, and then they reactivate the skills, and they go back in it.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. I don't know why I went off on that little soliloquy. It's almost like I was teaching a course there for a moment.
Well, no. I mean, I think because what
I'm
you're
a trainer by heart.
Yeah, there we go. Right. It seems pretty much useless to learn anything if you're not stoked to share it.
Right.
You know. So my sense is I think what you're doing is beautifully comprehensive, and sort of deceptively complex.
For sure.
Right?
It is deceptively complex.
And a lot of people, particularly when they...
That's what we say. It seems simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. Right. This is all really simple. Yeah. Fucking hard.
It takes a lifetime to do it well, right?
Yeah.
With mastery.
And what we're talking about, like, especially in the world of biohackers and stacks and tips and tricks and shortcuts, people are looking to, how do I get symptomatic flow? How do I catch a contact high of a fleeting state experience?
Right.
And what I hear you describing, and certainly where we, really choose to take our stand, is in causal flow. What happens when you align your whole self in integrity and congruence, such that flowy things happen to happen?
Well, you just described the difference between people deeply committed to training, mastery, like an Aikido master or student who wants to, looks at it as a lifelong journey, versus someone who's looking for a hack or a quick fix or, like you said, a symptomatic experience.
Yeah.
They really belong together, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, ideally you ladder up.
Ideally you ladder and have them both.
Right, you get better at stringing together the state experiences, and then rather than having your center of gravity return back to your waking state, hungry ghost, inner critic, blah, 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 you then start spending more and more time in no self, allowing yourself to be lived by the moment, right? And then you only notice when you drop out of it. To your earlier point, so the awareness goes from, oh, I'm in it, oh shit, now that just kicked me out of it, but I go chase it again, to I'm actually in it and not thinking about it most of the time, and I only notice when I take a gut punch or a shot to the kidneys, and I get doubled over, and then Bruce Lee's idea, right? Like that idea, we never fight from form. We don't ever start with ideal conditions. We fight to form, and that becomes the game.
Right. So imagine, though, what I love about symptomatic flow is, let's call it a peak experience, peak state. So the more glimpses you have or experience you have of peak state, they actually act like signposts or trail markers. Right? And so we can get back there more and more quickly. We know what conditions triggered it, and I imagine every human being's a little bit different. Like what's going to trigger you for flow is going to be different than what triggers me, and that it has a lot to do with brain structure and chemical makeup and life experiences and epigenetics and all that. But sort of like what Ken Wilber says in his integral theory, a peak state doesn't mean it doesn't change you. You have to get that stage of developmental shift where you permanently, your center of gravity shifts to a new stage of development. And you can almost claim that the higher stages of development, what he calls the teal level or integral levels, by their nature are the people who attain that stage of development are in a permanent flow state. Now the flow states will have different experiences depending upon their depth of, let's say, meditation or engagement, but they're in a permanent state of flow. So that's instructive to me because in order to change a stage, right, there's a lot of work involved. There's a lot of work, both, like you mentioned, shadow, clearing up shadow. That's why we do the work in Unveiled Mind, and that's probably the thing that holds most people back. It's like you can do all the work you want on transcendental, trying to transform in a vertical level, but if you got stuff holding you back in your shadow self, it's always going to pull you back down.
Yeah, 100%. And that can be at the level of like neuro-physiology and just straight up trauma in your system, and or it can be psychological hang-ups and hiccups.
Right, or a combination of both.
Yeah, and people who often choose to use rocket fuel indiscriminately, so they go for the quick and easy state chasing, are often trying to outrun.
Right, that's been my only critique of both the extreme sports and the hacking world, is that it's too easy to skim the top of the hacks and the fun and not do the deep work.
Yeah. And
I don't know how many of those folks are doing the deep work yet.
Well, I think there's an entire generation of them who were raised by baby boomers.
Right. That's you and me both.
Right. And so, the skimming of the cream is an issue, especially these days where, on the one hand, ecstatic practices, things that get you out of yourself, are more open, available, cheap, democratized than ever. And on the other hand, they're stripped out of all the lineage traditions and all of the gates and the filters that used to be in place.
Right, exactly.
I mean, even the Instagram nature of extreme sports these days, and toe-in surfing, and all these every ass hat with a jet ski can get a GoPro shot of them towing into Jaws these days, and they have no business being there.
And a lot of people are dying, aren't they?
Yeah,
my friend Andy Stump, we did a talk about wingsuit flying, and Michael, who's here in our audience, is one of my teammates, is a wingsuit flyer, and how much time he spends in preparation. He did a world record job. I think he flew 17 and a half miles or something like that in a wingsuit.
Wow!
But it's like 95% preparation and 5% the jump.
Yeah.
And the preparation is mental, and physical and strategic and tactical and, you know what I mean? Timing and place and weather and route. I mean, it's
all of it.
Unbelievable detail. And people are just thinking, wow, that looks cool. I think I'll go do that. And like 20 or so are dying a month. Last time I heard this stat. I don't know if it's accurate or true anymore. But
so there's a peak near Aspen that's very famous and photogenic. And a lot of people have been taking, selfies and YouTube shots. And 15 people died in May alone. Just 15 people.
Just falling off?
Just falling off the goddamn thing because it's a knife-edge ridge.
I've seen that in Yosemite happening now, too.
Yeah.
It's tragic. A couple went up and took a selfie, and they were gone. Poof.
Yeah, and so that kind of feedback loop where we get to skip the apprenticeship and try and skim the cream
straight to
and go for the glory shot, and that's happening not just in extreme sports, but it's also happening in ayahuasca tourism. It's happening in spiritual development. There's a lot of people who feel like they can do the equivalent of go to REI and buy a puffy North Face jacket and hang out their shingle as a Himalayan guide.
That's really interesting you said that, because I have a friend, I use the term with a small f, who was like, hey, I've done a number of ayahuascas, and he's microdosing, and he's doing it like all the time. It's become his main practice. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, I'll take you on a journey. I'm like, no, you won't. If I ever do it, it's going to be with a shaman or a master. You're playing with fire.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of that going on, especially where I live. In Encinitas, Southern California is kind of the epicenter, it seems, of. Or probably a few places, maybe Aspen, maybe, out in Wyoming, Jackson.
And it just feels like the humility of true apprenticeship, whether it's big mountains or big oceans, like the watermen in Hawaii, they know the pecking order, and they give respect to the ones who have come before them.
Right.
And there is a thinning out process where the young and foolish get weeded.
Right. You don't go to Pasco and don't collect your $200.
And they may burn bright briefly, but not for long.
It's the same with the SEALs. It's just highly structured in the SEALs. 2,000 people put their hand up, say, "Yeah, I want to be a SEAL," because they saw the video games and the movies.
Yeah.
And about actually, it's many more than that. So roughly 1,200 show up at SEAL training every year, and about 185 get through SEAL training and go to a SEAL team.
Yeah.
And by the time they deploy, that 185 is down to about 165. And then at the end of the first deployment, those who were like, I just wanted to say I was a Navy SEAL, they're gone. And so that takes it down probably to about another 100.
Wow.
After let's say 4 years. So 4 years, you go from 4,000 or 5,000 people to 100 who actually make it into their second deployment. And that's about when, the seasoned vets say, okay, we'll accept you as a teammate.
Yeah.
Yeah. The young guys walking around
because you're through all the sugar highs.
They got the trident, but you don't know what they're doing yet. Dangerous.
Yeah.
So all that's very interesting, but really need to talk about the Flow Genome Project and how is it that it seems kind of audacious to try to come up with a genome for what is flow. So are you approaching it from a biological, neurological point of view, or spiritual, or chemical, or or all the above? You're looking at all angles.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, everything but the spiritual.
Everything but spiritual.
And it's not because we don't recognize that domain of experience, and it's not because we haven't found it
You wanted to
central.
be accepted by the business world.
It's not even that. It's the idea that we kind of have a commitment that's very practical, which is we remain content neutral.
Right.
We will give you the instructions and the evidence to conduct reasonable experiments.
And you make whatever meaning you want.
Go and see for yourself. And then when you come back, and n equals 1, you're your own experiment.
Right.
So honor your own sovereignty. Don't take anybody's word from it, least of all ours. Yeah. Go gather your own data. Now, when you come back with that data, we'll help you unpack it.
Sure.
Now you've got your own. We haven't tainted your experiment. Right. So said simply, it's just let the mystery stay the mystery.
Okay. Sense.
Because when you, I mean, my experiences of, the more people, I mean, it's like Jimmy, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the badder ass the adventure athlete, the humbler they are in the bar. Right. And I'm sure that's true with the team guys too, right? Mm-hmm. There's nothing left to prove because you've faced Kali more than once, and that will take the edges off any of her sons. Right. And so that's the genome idea is somewhere between the human genome, actually mapping DNA sequences, which we also do, but also kind of like the Pandora music station, like the music genome. What is the kind of just the essential building blocks? Mm-hmm. So we look at it from everything from the neuroanatomy, what parts of the brain turn on and off, neuroelectricity, what's firing at what frequencies where, neurochemistry, which hormones and chemicals are going through our bodies and brains, what's happening with our heart, what's happening with our posture, what's happening with our psychology, our maps and meaning making, right? Yeah. So what is the entire stack that leads us into those interesting terrain? And because we now know that, we don't have to wait for someone to accidentally stumble or bumble into it and go, oh my gosh, I'm in this magical, ineffable place, lightning struck. Right. This was like, how do we build a Tesla coil right. and make lightning strike on demand? And so that was the real premise, is just demystifying these otherwise mythologized peak states and saying, hey man, this is human birthright, and it's not rocket science, and you can go paint by numbers, have them.
If you want to explain it away as Christ consciousness flowing through you, that have at it, right? I'm just saying that everyone gets to do what they want from their spiritual context, but you don't want to touch that, because you want it to be practical, repeatable,
until I put down my nets and go and become a fisher of men. Yeah, I'm holding off on that one for as long as possible.
So, what have you discovered to be the most interesting aspects of? Let's talk about what flow is, the flow experience.
Sure.
And then what external and internal things you can stack to trigger or to tap into a flow state.
Sure. So there's a bunch of different non-ordinary state scales and rubrics and things that different researchers and different wisdom traditions have come up with. In Stealing Fire, we just tried to boil it down, because anything more than a handful of things, no one remembers. So the idea is that flow states are those places where you experience selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. And the selflessness is just usually that inner voice where I think you're number 2 maybe, where you said positivity, like how do you get to the witness, right? It's the absence of the chattering, right? That fucker, he goes away. So that's the selflessness part, and we just tend to be super absorbed in the thing at hand. The timelessness is, it's minutes seem like hours seem like minutes, but it's definitely not rational linear clock time. Effortlessness tends to be, this fulfills me in ways I didn't know I could be fulfilled, and I cannot wait to do it again.
And it seemed easy, or it looked easy to the
that there was a degree of ease and or precision and or elevation of skill set that I don't normally have access to. Yeah,
shibumi, the term shibumi comes to mind. Effortless perfection. Yeah, it's a Japanese term that happens in mastery.
Zanshin, Uwe, there's a lot of, basically, if you're looking to track this back through history, it's the monastic traditions and the martial traditions are the folks that went deepest on this stuff. And then, and the final one is richness, which tends to be heightened information and inspiration, because you're often connecting a lot of dots. So, a working definition particularly, and this is one we actually first floated with Dev Group out in Virginia Beach, but it was the idea of, because, we knew they wouldn't want a fluffy definition of flow. So we're like, look, it's basically extreme situational awareness plus hyper ergonomics. So you're paying, that's the Zen Shin. You're hyper aware, as your buddy was, noticing who's taking a beat on him, that whole thing. So rather than being tunnel focused, you're high bandwidth. And therefore your frame rate and your decision making is through the roof. And then the hyper-ergonomics is just the alignment, the efficiency between intention and action is nearly perfect with very little voltage drop. So it's like the Bruce Lee's 1-inch punch. Right. It's that kind of idea. So for me, that's a very pragmatic, kind of concrete description of what feels like it happens in that state.
Can only come through training, right? And so there's really no hack for hyper-ergonomic alignment, I don't think.
No, I mean, you might get lucky and do the Napoleon Dynamite on the dance floor, and especially, right? But you're probably not going to be able to repeat that. And again, I mean, not to sound like grumpy old man and get those kids off our lawn, right? But fucking millennials, man. I mean, like, there's the lack of discipline and the willingness to skim the cream and the emphasis on social media validation over ditch digging. And over humble long-term path to mastery is pernicious.
You probably connect this dot in the book, but the repetition in training that leads to that hyper state of what you call it, ergonomic alignment.
Yeah, just hyper-ergonomics.
Hyper-ergonomics. What a cool term. Fancy. I like that. Makes it sound smart all of a sudden.
I'm sitting the shit out of my Herman Miller chair, man. Just look at me.
I'm hyper-ergonomically aligned here. Anyways, repetition and training, like for us learning how to shoot or parachute jump and then putting all these diverse skills together.
Yep.
That's what leads over time to the ability to have a hyper state of awareness, because you don't have to think anymore. You don't have to get into that rational, hey, what step comes next?
Yep.
It's like back to your dad, to be a test pilot, you got to not think about 99% of what you've learned when things go wrong.
Yeah, it's the old Archilochus quote, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to your training.
Right, absolutely.
And get that shit in, like, annexed in your body in long-term muscle memory such that cognition doesn't shit the bed in the high stakes.
Now, you've studied what happens in the brain from a neurotransmitter standpoint. Are you suggesting that different neurotransmitters are triggered for different types of flow state or different activities?
Yeah, I mean, I wish we were that far along. Okay. Like, to get to that I mean, my assumption, if I jump ahead to what do I imagine researchers will be figuring out 5 to 10 years from now, it will be that there's no such thing as flow unilaterally. That was a messy, sloppy term for a whole bunch of things.
Right.
It is.
Yeah, I'm kind of there with you right now.
Right.
It's a fun term, but
it's a fun but fuzzy term.
It's like meditation.
Yeah.
Or even leadership.
Or race or gender. Like the more you look at it, the squishier the edges get. Right. And that it's probably more like a heat map. And that there will be different combinations for different genetic, epigenetic, environmental, and sort of objectives. Right. And so those will all be unique. But we will see, there is a general zip code. And in general, it's in the opposite direction of high waking beta wave neuroelectric activity, generally away from hyper-focused prefrontal cortical activity, so our kind of executive function, waking self. It's generally not involving, and this is actually interesting. Now I'm going to have to really slow down, because it does involve cortisol. It does involve norepinephrine. It does involve stress hormones. There's an arousal state.
That's right.
It actually involves, at least some of our research most recently is showing, it's also involving not cardiac coherence. So basically, cardiac coherence goes down. Right. So because basically you're juicing to do the thing. So it's different than meditative states. So this is where
the training comes in. The SEAL has to get juiced to go jump out of the airplane.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's controlling the effects of the neurotransmitters from that stress response, and inducing the brainwave patterns for the flow to occur with the heightened state of arousal.
Yep.
Which is mind-numbing to think about if you can unpack that.
Yeah.
I
think the best analogy I've come across, and this showed up in some of our, in fact, Mike Gervais, who's the performance psych for Seattle Seahawks, and he also did the Project Stratos jump with Andy Walsh and the Red Bull guys, right? So they were doing some fascinating studies on cardiac coherence and realizing, well, what's the winning combo for an elite athlete? And what they realized is there wasn't a winning combo. It was more like the best humans, as far as peak performers, are actually more like a well-tuned downhill mountain bike shock. So you want lots of travel to take big hits on your fork. Or you can think about a motorcycle if you're not familiar with bikes, right? So you want lots of travel that can take a big hit, but you also want good dampening and rebound so that it doesn't become a pogo stick and buck you off on the backside.
Right.
So you really want range, and you want the ability to take in energy and dissipate energy while maintaining traction.
Fascinating.
Right? Yeah. And so it's a dynamic thing in both directions, with the outcome of, do your wheels stay out on the ground? Can you steer the thing through it all? And that to me feels like one of the more helpful mental metaphors to think it through.
Man, this is fascinating. So we only have a few minutes left because we're at a time crunch at the Unbuilt Mind Summit here in Carlsbad. But from a listener standpoint who's like, oh, this is all very interesting philosophy and theory, Jamie, what can you tell me, like right now when I stop driving my car or while I'm driving my car, how can I be better at flow?
Sure. Well, people ask us that more than once. And we typically say, if you want more flow, forget about flow and learn to struggle more gracefully and recover more deeply.
Oh, interesting.
So basically, struggle gracefully. This is in basketball, it's the pick and roll. You come across a 6'7" guy in the paint, you don't go through him, you go around him
reach
gracefully.
For the brass ring, but do it gracefully.
Yes,
don't do it recklessly.
Right. And don't give up, because it's through the clouds, not beneath the clouds, that the sun shines. So learn to struggle more gracefully. And then also learn to recover more deeply. And that means sleep, rest, movement, hydration. It also means, in this day and age, leave your phone in the kitchen. Don't take it to your bedroom. Don't be online on the plane. Read a book. Simple things that just let our nervous systems recover and get back to zero, because from zero...
train our brain to be in an alpha state where it's comfortable there as opposed to uncomfortable. Like, oh my God, I got to pick up my phone. There's something dinging me.
Exactly. And don't fetishize someplace you're not, like a flow state. Like open your eyes, look around, be kind, enjoy, smell the flowers, all the basics. I could actually
make the argument that flow is our normal state that we've kind of forgotten.
Yeah.
We've gotten away from. We're disconnected from it. We've fallen from it. So awakening can be essentially coming back to your true self. Now that might sound kind of metaphysical, but that's been my experience. Waking is very much of a biological, psychological, neurological experience.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And when you wake up and start getting out of that little monkey mind, that little bastard you call him. I think you call him an asshole or something like that. Actually.
Something.
Yeah. But I agree with you. Yeah, he's a real bugger. But once you get out of that and you can then at will engage the thinker, but disengage and being the witness, then it's like coming home. It's the experience that I've had. And that's flow, I think. That's one definition for me.
Yeah, 100%.
Coming home and being whole again.
Yeah, that's a mighty fine thing.
Nice. This has been a real pleasure and an honor, Jamie. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Look forward to many more and hearing your speech here at the Unbuilt Mind Summit, and we really appreciate you being here.
For sure, man.
And I look forward to skiing with you out at Powder Mountain.
Yeah.
Hoo-yah.
Let's get some turns in.
Let's do that, right?
Nice.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Jamie Wheal coming at you from the Unbuilt Mind Summit here in Carlsbad. Don't forget to check out the new Unbuilt Mind online so you can begin to train to access flow on demand. See you next time. This is Mark Devine. Hey, this is Mark Devine. Thanks very much for watching the Unbeatable Mind podcast on YouTube. You can also find the podcast at iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, and unbeatablemind.com/podcasts. Be sure to check out the new episode released every week. Hoo-yah.